Okay, my name again is Paul Szymanski, and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's not Mexico, that's the United States. It's where the basis for all those Western movies and Breaking Bad and things like that, and actually the International Balloon Fiesta, which is starting tomorrow, where they have 600 balloons go up at once, which is actually kind of cool. Today is kind of different from what I did a few weeks ago for you guys. And that is, I like to say it's more technical for outer space warfare, but it's not technical in terms of frequencies and electronics and things like that. It's down in the details of how you exactly manage space wars, how you do command and control, how you decide how to attack and things like that. So it's kind of free form. And quite frankly, it's the first time I ever put this briefing or presented it. I've had it for many years. Essentially, it's looking at what the Joint Chiefs of Staff have, just an excellent document of how do you fight wars. It's Joint Pub 3-0, and very thick things that goes through all of the steps one does to plan for, pre-plan a conflict, during the conflict, and after the conflict. And it's called Operational Art and Design, and it's for terrestrial only. And what I did is I took that document and said, well, okay, I'm gonna translate this to space. So I call it Space Operational Art and Design, SOAD. And this is what I've been doing for years in terms of trying to look at more traditional doctrine for warfighting, going all the way back to Sun Tzu, but looking at, let's say, more recent traditional, for example, air defense doctrine translates very well into space defense kinds of doctrine. And this Joint Chiefs kind of doctrine is very good too. So I'm going to go through some of the details on that. And just a little bit about me. Will said, oh, I'm with the Space Strategy Center. Well, yeah, that's me and nobody else. That's just what I call my consulting business. I'm almost 70 years old, so I'm semi-retired, but I do a lot of consulting on the side. And essentially, I'm developing foundational space doctrine and battle management decision capabilities, because I think one of the two top things for fighting wars in space is, let's say, maneuverability, but maybe secondary or maybe primarily situational awareness. It's called space situational awareness or space domain awareness, but really understanding what's happening in space. And that's kind of very difficult because you're talking about tens of thousands of miles away from sensors on Earth. It's very hard to directly image satellites. You're not really sure who is who, what the capabilities are inside a satellite system. So it's very difficult to understand the situation, to understand the adversary, even understand yourself. Let's say your satellite suddenly stops working. Well, why? Was it the electronics just broke, solar flares increased the radiation dosage, a micrometeor, maybe intentional human caused failures, or maybe unintentional human caused failures. So there's a lot of things. And then there's also like, well, I'm pretty sure my adversary did this to me, but you also have to figure out, well, why? What is his strategy? What is his intent? And intent is the most difficult thing to assess, even on the ground, in terms of intelligence. And there's so many examples through thousands of years of history of wars getting out of control because of misunderstanding intent. And for space, intent might be, oh, they just want to show resolve. Then we just want to show you, stop whatever you're doing on the ground, or I'll do something to you in space. So it's not necessarily serious. Maybe even before that, maybe you just snuggling up to a satellite, take a look at it, and maybe accidentally bumped it, or something. Who knows? But then there's different degrees of, well, there's one kind of attack called decapitation, that is taking out the national command authorities, the leadership. And so maybe the attack is going against strategic communication. Is the attack going against all kinds of imagery or navigational satellites, even weather, though I've never seen anyone say they were going to attack weather satellites. What is the intent? Is he just going to try to take out as much as possible? Or is he just taking out space systems that are optimized to cover a particular battlefield? For example, if you're at war in the Western Pacific, maybe you have different rules of engagement for satellites that cover that region versus, let's say, the Atlantic. You might say, well, there's no reason for him to attack things in the Atlantic, so we're going to be a little more forgiving if a satellite dies and things like that. So these are the kinds of issues, the bigger issues, that I don't think anyone else is really working on. I mean, I've been working this for 47 years in one form or another. And they've always talked about onesies and twosies. Oh, we're going to go against the satellite, or we're going to defend, but never like the bigger picture. Well, they're attacking 50 of our satellites right now. How do you kind of manage that? How do you manage the response? How do we manage after the battle? You win the war and lose the peace, kind of thing. Have you really thought that through? And the Joint Chiefs of Staff have, for battles on the ground, for terrestrial war, but I haven't seen any of that for space, or even the psychology there or the culture there yet to think the bigger pictures. And so that's what I've been trying to do, is look at that bigger picture, look at the study of military history, understanding the fact that, whoa, you can have all these great high-tech gear and expensive weapon system, this and that, but it's really an adversary commander's minds fighting each other, and they communicate to each other via troops and guardians and forces and equipment and things like that. But it's still all about, ancient Greek warfare of, your experience, your attitudes, your fears, the command of the political people above you, where they're going to shoot you if you do it wrong. All these kind of factors play in, and they only can play in even more so for space, because it's such a mysterious place that you're not really sure what's happening, and there's no history. I think there's been 5 or 6 space wars, but there's no history going back hundreds of years of how you fight wars in space. And I can sit here and dream about how one should do that, but who knows how it's really going to come down one way or the other. So, you really got to start thinking about this. You probably should have some think tanks established for space warfare, whether in the United States or outside. I've always said that, in the United States Space Force, you really should bring in foreign allies to help you in figuring out this doctrine, strategies, tactics, because you need different perspectives. And, again, it's psychological warfare we're talking about in some sense. And so you really need to bring in these other ideas, because I believe whoever's going to win a real space war is not going to be the one with the most equipment, but the one with the best leaders who understand what's happening and who have trained their forces to understand what's happening. Because it's going to be kind of iffy if you've got some poor, Space Force captain sitting at a command center at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he's got to decide whether we're at war or not. In some sense, he's got to understand, well, these satellites suddenly stopped working. What happened? And not only that, but why, and what's the strategy being implemented against us, and things like that. And so that's kind of a difficult thing to do. And probably luck will have a lot to do with it because of the lack of experience. So, I've been looking at grand strategies, operational strategies, and even down to tactics now and again. And then whatever's happening in space, you have to kind of link to the ground, because the space isn't there just for its own right. I know the Space Force people probably get upset to hear that, but we don't have colonies in space that Space Force is defending against and things like that. Those space systems are there to support not only civilian, but the military and the battlefield. And you have to understand, space is mostly information. So which kinds of satellites should you defend more, or worry about more, or have spares about more? Is it more important in the battlefield to know imagery, have imaging information generated from satellites, so not only the status of the enemy, but even your own forces, where they're at? Or is it better communication satellites? If you want to, let's say, attack an adversary, and the general says, okay, take out his capabilities in space, and you only have enough anti-satellites, ASATs, to go against one category or another. Should I go against his imagery? Should I go against his communication? Should I go get... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Merci. Ouais.
Oh, I thought somebody said something. Or should I go against his navigational and satellites? So how do we understand what's more important? On the ground, there's a lot of simulations and algorithms to say, well, if I take out this bridge on the ground, the adversary won't be able to get across for another 6 hours or something like that. And that I can calculate the battlefield and how they'll affect the battlefield. But if you look at, the adversary commander had the picture of the battlefield, and so he was able to make a better decision, is that more important to deny him that capability, or deny him the capability to communicate to his forces, or deny his forces the ability to use satellite navigational, like GPS, GLONASS, BADAO, and so his weapons effects will be less effective, less severe. So which one of those are more important? If we only have enough ASATs to take out one of those, let's say, I don't really know. And it's probably dependent on where you're fighting, and even the organization and psychology of who you're fighting. There's been some thought that some of these dictatorial kinds of countries, maybe taking out the communication is enough to have the forces stop dead and do nothing, that they're not used to thinking on their own, where the US forces are well known for just going off and doing their own thing and never actually, they get trained their doctrine, but they never listen to it, kinds of things. I've heard theories that, like North and South Korea kind of conflict, that imagery doesn't really matter that much. There are only so many mountain passes, and we know they're going to come to those passes. And so, you almost more or less know what's happening, whether you can see it from space or not. So, one should really be thinking these through, should have, let's say, a think tank that's thinking these through, that's modeling and simulation, testing algorithms, war gaming. And it doesn't have to be fancy computer war gaming. It could be what's called tabletop war gaming, where you just have a bunch of pieces of paper and scenarios and controllers who say, okay, now this is happening. What are you going to do about it? And it's very important to have, let's say, retired generals or even diplomats or politicians as part of that war game, because you could spend billions on some fancy space weapon system, but ultimately you might not be allowed to use it, because space is so politicized that you show up to the president and say, hey, we want to use this thing and we'll destroy half the adversary's space assets. And the president says, no way, you're going to create all this space junk, and you're going to upset some of our allies because some of them are using parts of that space systems that you want to take out. Think of something else. So, you have to really play all those games and understand, how all that is going to come down. So my calculations have shown that space wars will be over with in 24 to 48 hours. I mean, I have the software. I had them make it for me a few years ago, and I took 100 random space objects, not necessarily satellites, and said, match the orbit of 100 other random space objects. And matching the orbit implies you've come close enough to do something bad to them, an ASAT. And I think it was like 96% of those space objects match the orbit in 24 hours. In other words, the war is over with before maybe you even could figure what's coming out and who's hitting against you. What are their strategies? Why are they going against you? How have you been damaged? Do you even know the value of space to yourself? Oh, we took out this 5-meter resolution imagery satellite. Does that really matter? Well, I have this 3-meter imagery satellite. Maybe that's good enough. Oh, but maybe it doesn't have sufficient coverage in a timely manner. Have you understood all of those factors when trying to figure out, what's happening in space? So timeliness is everything. So, earlier I mentioned having an intelligent commander is probably the most important aspect, but it has to be a decisive commander too for space, because things are going to happen faster. They're going to happen where he's not going to have the complete picture. He'll be lucky if he has 10 to 20% of the complete picture. And so he's got to make decisions quickly that, some parts of them probably will be wrong, but it's better than nothing, because otherwise you'll lose the whole, space forces in one way or the other. And then finally, what I'm trying to do here is sort of normalize the process of space command and control, battle management, and make it look as much as possible like the traditional terrestrial, simply because that's what people understand. That's what kind of works. That's what the generals understand, because they probably really don't understand the physics of space and so forth. So you want to make it look as close as possible. And things like situation maps. If you can make a space warfare situation maps of satellites and ASATs in space that look similar to a terrestrial battle map, you're light years ahead of creating understanding, because you might understand it as an analyst, but ultimately you got to convince somebody else that this is what's really happening. And that's probably the most difficult thing, because, in the military history, you always have the ones that say, well, I knew that was happening, but no one listened to me, or the intel came in that, the Japanese were preparing for Pearl Harbor, but we didn't do anything about it. We didn't believe it, and again, in space, it's got to be even more confusing. We don't know what's coming off. We really don't know what could be ASATs. They don't have some big battle station up there and things like that. It could be hidden inside, different spacecraft that are supposedly civilian, or something that's faking it out and making like it's space junk. Okay, so I grandiosely call this a unified field theory, maybe, for space situational awareness, satellite attack warning, space battle management, trying to get the whole thing all integrated in one whole. Now, you've seen this slide from the last briefing, and it's just all the kinds of ways that one can mess with satellites. Let me get a better pointer. I mean, you've got the latest thing are inspector satellites that could have ASAT capabilities, maintenance satellites, might even have a space-based laser. I don't know of anyone really planning that. I suppose you could have a lower powered laser that would get up close and blind, or maybe destroy the optics train or something like that. But a big, humongous Star Wars thing, I don't know, that's, who knows, $50 billion, $100 billion, and it's an awfully juicy target. So the important thing is you're not necessarily going against the satellite. You can go against the ground terminals. You can go against the links between the satellite and the ground terminals, because if you've isolated the satellite from the ground, you've done your job. The thing is worthless. As a matter of fact, I just yesterday came up with the idea, if you had these maintenance satellites with arms or inspector satellites, if you just threw a Mylar bag over a satellite, it no longer would receive power from its solar panels. It couldn't communicate to the ground. It couldn't maneuver anymore. You've created a simplistic ASAT that is not going to generate any debris or anything like that. Now, I don't know if that's technically possible, but why not? The other thing is going against the ground terminals. You could have cyber means. You could have special forces, iron bombs on target. You could have the electronics that go into a satellite. And some of these are foreign sourced, you could have cyber code embedded in there that you could implement years later. And then more in the 60s and 70s, they were more interested in nuclear bursts and radiation, hardening of satellites. I don't know how much they do that nowadays. There's the solar weather that's, again, radiation, oriented and things like that. So there's a lot of, let's see, we had jamming, lasers, and nuclear, natural. Okay, we've got it all down. So getting more into the details. And I want to mention too that I took this Joint Pub 3-0 of how do you fight wars terrestrially, and I put together the mother of all spreadsheets. I think it's over 100 tabs that going through all the examples they have of the different steps of terrestrial warfare and coming up with space examples for that. What are the possible rules of engagement? What are the possible steps for termination criteria and things like that? And so that's available if anyone's interested in, but it's something that has actual data, off the top of my head, that you can use to populate command and control systems. So there are foundational levels of war. And this is the way the US looks at it. I don't know about other countries, but there's levels called grand strategy, operational art, and tactics. So the grand strategy is more, how do we put together a whole war plan? How have we built up the industrial base for that? Are we going to attack this country or that? We're going to move forces via Navy forces here. It's sort of the bigger picture, where the operational art is more of divisions, moving divisions around actually on the battlefield. And then the tactics is maybe not necessarily squad level, but a higher level than that. And this is, I don't even think this is, these concepts are Air Force. I've borrowed a lot from the Army, because as far as I'm concerned, the Army knows better how to fight wars than the Air Force. And then, so let's look at grand strategy. And I think you have to start from foundational principles. Study military history. You can learn a lot from that. And I don't care what era you're talking about, if it's futuristic, alien warfare, or whatever, you can learn a lot from that. And from that, you can derive military doctrine. And right now we're deriving space doctrine. And then it doesn't do you any good to have the doctrine unless you do the education and training, so that the forces really understand what you feel you should do. Now, doctrine's a funny thing. There's the Air Force Doctrine Center in Alabama, the state of Alabama. And a few years ago, I called the Air Force colonel and said, hey, I've got all this space doctrine stuff. Do you want it? And the response was, no, we only do doctrine we derive from past wars. We don't do doctrine of future wars. Mm. So you can see already kind of a bad attitude. It's like, I guess we got to lose a few wars before we understand how to win them, which is like, well, yeah, you'll learn a lot, from the war, especially if you're defeated, you weren't even better. But it doesn't hurt to do some pre-planning beforehand, and maybe you'll get something out of that. So you got this actual pre-planning, and they are, the military does that. They've got these operations plans, op plans, they're called, things that, well, if we go to war in Europe, boom, 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 this is what we're going to do. And, the adage is the first casualty of war is the plans. And that's true, but it still helps to understand that, because maybe you got to pre-position forces, and you have to have these plans to understand, well, should I buy more tanks or more ships or more planes? And, how are we going to implement these? And the thing is true for space or ASATs or any of these things, If you're planning a war in space, it's like, well, does Doctrine tell me it's maybe a good idea to have weapons on the moon? Maybe, I don't know, So you also have inputs, what I call the long-term intelligence, that's saying, well, our adversaries, they're building a space shuttle that's going to be available in 10 years from now. So we better have some cool laser that can shoot it down, or something like that. You got to think it through. And then there's short-term intel, which is, it looks like they're deploying that battle station shuttle in another week. We better do something about it. And you have this overall, it's called correlation of forces. And that is, well, how good are we and how good are they? And if we went to war, who would win, kind of thing. So you've got to understand your own capabilities, which is just as important, Oh, we bought all these fancy new $50 million tanks. How do we use them? Do we use them in mass or individually, or, my gosh, they're too heavy now, they can't go across the bridges, they're going to sink in the swamp. We've got to have it put together with these bridge layers, and we've got to send in special forces ahead of time just to test the soil, which they did in Desert Storm. You've really got to understand, your situation. You have to understand, well, yeah, we got these great aircraft, but 40% of them are always in the hangar being repaired at any given time. So what is our actual capabilities? And that probably includes what we've done in a lot of military exercises, and the forces did pretty good, but these other kinds of forces, they really suck, so we can't have confidence in them. So you understand your own situation, understand exactly where are they deployed, have they been rested, do they have casualties, what is it? I think 15% casualties is enough to pull the unit out of the line, because everyone's so discouraged that their friends are dead, things like that. Now, is that true for space? Is space more a video game? Sort of like the people in Las Vegas who are controlling the UAVs and the drones going over, well, it used to be Afghanistan. Maybe it's still going over Afghanistan and Iraq. They're just sitting there comfortably with their mint julep and fighting wars. Is that the same for space? Is morale somehow different? I would think so. That'd be interesting to get some psychologists in and try to look that over. But at any rate, of course, you need to understand the red force capabilities. And you've got all this national level intelligence collection, spy satellites, spies on the ground, signals intelligence, trying to figure out, well, what are the capabilities? And, what do they really plan to be doing with those capabilities? They have these great capabilities, but they're not planning on attacking us anytime soon. Or, boy, they really hate us. And look at, they're just edging towards the border. It looks like they really want to go for it. So there's all these kinds of assessments. And there's all kinds of political, legal, treaty, environmental constraints that you have to consider when understanding this, that, oh, we have the best capabilities sitting on the ground, ready to attack, but there's a tornado coming over at the moment. So they're not going to do anything, and then even more obscure, the perceptions, assumptions, cultural biases that, we're always mirror imaging our ideals of what the other side's thinking. And the other side, might be, Eastern Asia or someplace thinks entirely different than us. I remember us spending a lot of time in the 90s, 80s, 90s, worrying about Warsaw Pact and how do we fight wars. And oh, by the way, I was doing space-to-earth weapons, and those were very effective. And I did some of the first analyses on that. But at any rate, we were trying to figure out, escalation control so that Russians wouldn't start nuking and, all this stuff. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall and all this, the Russians came out and said, oh, we would have started nuking immediately in the beginning. We didn't have all these subtleties of, oh, we're trying to be nice guys and political this and that and diplomats. And so we were just fooling ourselves. And maybe if a war even happened, we would be too timid, particularly in space, trying to be nice guys, or, oh, we're going to not violate this treaty, kind of thing. And it's like, treaties get violated during the war all the time, get over it. Okay, the operational level, you have what's called the space operational picture. And this is coming from, it's all been informed by the strategic level. And there's threat warning and assessment. You've got to know, okay, are they gearing up? Are they about to attack? And from that, you derive courses of action that are space related. You end up with a plan A and a plan B, maybe even a plan C. And so you got to, write that all down. You got to figure that all. That's why you have staffs of hundreds, if not thousands, figuring that all out. And you still have that short-term intel, trying to figure out what's the actual situation in space. And, it's not only space, it's like, well, what's happening at his launch facilities? What's happening at his tracking, telemetry, and control sites? His command sites? Do we suddenly see a lot of extra vehicles parked outside the command center, the space-related command center? Does that mean something's up? There's something years ago that was called pizza int for intelligence. That is, if they start delivering a lot of pizza at the Pentagon late at night, something is up. I mean, there's a lot of little funny things that you could tell. So the space operational picture, of course, is somehow my mouse is dying, is informed by the space situational awareness, the space surveillance and space object identification. There's key questions here, to my mind. There are 6 key questions. Will space systems be under attack in the near future? I mean, you could have maybe question 0. Our adversaries planning to attack us sometime in the future, and they've got a 20-year program to build these ASATs and things like that. But at the operational level, it's like, well, they started maneuvering these satellites to key choke points. And this choke point is key to attacking our imagery satellites or interrobers or something like that. And we not only see 1, we see 5 of them. Maybe they're going to put 2 on each satellite just to make sure they really did the job right. That's an indicator, Are there suddenly a lot of strange new objects out there that we never saw before? Usually we see about 4,000. Now there's 6,000 in the last few weeks. What's happening here? Are those space junk, debris or something like that? And I have software actually that I invented that looks at strange things happening in space. That's like, it looks at individual satellites and says, well, they claim this was weather satellite. And if you look at all other weather satellites that are up there, they have a certain size and mass, and they have a certain orbit and a certain radar cross-section and optical cross-section. And, the orbital elements are kind of within this sphere. And this weather satellite looks like that, and it's looked like it's been within those parameters, and it's looked like that for years, and suddenly it's not. Suddenly it's twice the size now. What does that mean? Did something come out? Some huge jammer antenna, some space mine or laser came out? I don't know. That's an indicator. Oh my gosh, we just had 10 of our adversary satellites suddenly significantly change parameters, whether orbital or size or the radar cross section is different, that's suspicious. And the software I have adds it up per country. And it says, well, over the last 24 hours, this country has had the most suspicious changes in its state of satellites.
So sorry, Paul. We can say that camouflage is the things in space. So because we can have, you just talk about some weather satellites that can be, like how we say, camouflaged in space weapons camouflaged in weather satellites.
Yeah, and I'm sure that is happening. The United States is in charge of the United Nations catalog of space objects.
Yes.
And I've been inside Cheyenne Mountain complex, and I've seen the yellow stickies at the Space Surveillance Center that says, do not track this satellite or that satellite. I know there's satellites that, they're trying to not have anyone know about, against international treaties. Of course, it happens all the time.
Yes.
Let's not be babies about it. So of course they're trying to hide things. And of course there's satellites that look harmless. I mean, I've had idea that some country can send up this civilian science satellite and purposely explode it in space. But before they explode it, over Antarctica where there's no sensors, maneuver out a sub-satellite, a daughter satellite that has some evil intent, let's say. And then the next day they announce, oh, nuts, our science satellite blew up. Oh, sorry, and then that evil intent little microsatellite sort of floats around in the space debris, and the Space Force tracks it as, oh yeah, that's space debris. And it's sitting there for years, happy and just ready to go attack something. How do you prevent that? You can go see there's a patent from the 1970s for a low observables stealth satellite. It looks like a barbell. It's unclassed. Why are they even thinking of the 70s? Man, it's like 50 years ago. I'm sure they built some, I've seen one analysis called smart attitude. And that is, if you have a satellite is, let's say, essentially a box, and the sun hits off one side of the box and reflects back into the earth. And so, you could see a signal. And most satellites are tracked optically, not radar. All you have to do is move the box slightly so any speculars from the sun bounce off into deep space. And very easy to do. Any satellite could probably do it. And you get down to 18th magnitude, very dim. And that's before even trying to paint it black or, making it into this barbell thing or something like that. NASA, there's called radar absorptive materials, RAM, they've been around for a while.
Yes.
NASA invented optical absorptive materials a few years ago. So you put that on there, you put it out way beyond geo, between geo and the moon, and it's kind of a microsatellite size thing. Nobody's going to find that. And the previous Air Force, and probably still the Space Force, gets very arrogant about it. They say, oh, we know where everything's at. I've heard them say this many times. And they say, well, we see the satellite launched and, goes up and it separates from the booster. And then we track it with all these radars and optical systems and all that. And they say, we know where everything's up there. And arrogance is the first step to defeat, because I think, well, gee, I've got statistics that show all these lost satellites. So we've lost one satellite. We didn't know what happened to it. And there's a Russian one, and the Russians later on published, oh yeah, it was here, and it's very difficult to track highly inclined, highly eccentric satellites. Gochi, look that one up. It's one of my favorite satellites, European satellite. It was measuring the geogravitational potential. And so it had to be very low, so low, it had little stubby wings on it, slightly going through the atmosphere. And because it was so low, to keep it up, they had to have electric thrusters constantly thrusting.
Yeah,
For 2.5 years, it was thrusting. Okay, put electric thrusters on satellites that sit there for years, don't use the thrusters, and just before you start a war, make them start thrusting continuously. And suddenly all of the Keplerian orbital dynamics algorithms don't work anymore. It's not natural perturbations or whatever. Are you really going to track that? Are you going to track it if it moves over the Antarctica or something?
Yeah. But if I understand you, there is a saying in aerospace industry that stealth in space is impossible. But if I understand you, stealth is clearly possible.
Oh yeah,
for some satellites or other systems.
Every 2 weeks I download the satellite catalog, complete catalog, as published by, I guess, the Space Force. Now I've been doing it for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I just noticed it's a statistic. Fully 1/3 of all the space objects on there are called analyst satellites to be analyzed later. And that's a name for satellites. They don't know what the hell they are.
Oh, fuck.
1/3 of the whole catalog. How many of those you think are ASAT?
1/3. That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's
just
crazy.
Look. I could show you the statistics. It was like 11,000 were analyst objects, and the total catalog is 30,000 something. So okay, you guys, you're BSing me when it comes to we know everything, And I think the other thing is that the U.S. is so used to fighting wars with second and third world countries. They're not used to being fooled by full adversaries, maybe the Western way of war. I don't know that, if you've got 500 million Chinese about to die, they're going to get very clever on you, and they're going to have all sorts of clever little things that they're doing to you. And you better just expect that. And you better have your own clever things. Anyway, Will has illustrated the fact that chime in anytime you want. This is kind of an open-ended briefing. I guess I haven't even briefed this before.
Okay.
And half the charts are backup charts. So
of course.
Zapping around back and forth. Anyway, so I never even got this. So will the space system be under attack in the near future? Are we currently under attack? So it's like, well, it looks like they're setting up for attack over the next 24 hours. And now it's a day later and we're looking and a satellite stops working. Okay, was that an attack? Was it just accidental failure, and then 2 days later, another one stops working. Well, that's not terribly too unusual, but are we really under attack? Are we really neurotic enough to start taking out all 50 of the adversary satellites? Because that's indication and warning, It's probably very hard to even understand you're currently under attack. And I see these fantasies saying, oh, we're going to defend satellites. And I think we're talking hypervelocities up there. If you don't mind creating debris, you're not going to defend against that. Maybe you can defend against one of these satellites that's tooling up to you slowly over days and weeks. And it's kind of in rendezvous and proximity operations, RPO. And so maybe you can kind of shoot back, or I had an idea to have all these prickly antennas coming out that would mess it up and stuff. But those aren't true war fighting capabilities. War fighting capabilities are quick and dramatic and decisive. That's why I'm really not into the cyber realm, because I don't think they're necessarily decisive. You really don't understand whether you've done it or not. So, okay, we're currently under attack. We decided it looks like they were set up for attack. We just had 10 satellites in the last 24 hours go off. That sounds like attack to me. It's not solar flares or anything. So we know we're in trouble. Now, who is attacking us? We don't happen to be at war on the ground. We really hate this one country. So we could sit there and be biased and say, oh, it's probably them. But maybe it's another country trying to stir the pot, trying to make us go to war. You know, are you really sure? And there's one thing, if you had a bunch of airplanes or ships come at you and attack, and you could see the national flag on the side of the ship, you could, you know, the prisoners you got, you could see, oh yeah, they're this nationality, you know. But in space, and when all the ASATs are kind of hidden and you didn't see it coming, and you're not really sure because you can't go up there and kick the parts and see, oh yeah, look at this big hole in the side of this satellite. I guess that, you know, was a laser or something, you know, so it's very hard. And then if you even decide, oh yeah, okay, they attacked us, we know who did it. Are you going to go all out based on that? Or are you going to wait a little bit to understand what is his strategy? What is his intent? So you have an appropriate response. I mean, even the UN Charter says you can't just go all out and kill everything in sight. You have to have a militarily appropriate response. And there's a lot of thought of how much do terrestrial laws of armed conflict translate to space and things like that, you know. And then you could be at level 5 here. Okay, yeah, they're building up their attack. Looks like they attacked. We know they attacked us. Damage has been caused. Okay, great, yeah. So what did it really damage us? Gee, these idiots, they just attacked a science satellite. Oh, we weren't really using that. I'm not sure why they attacked that. Oh yeah, they attacked this NATO satellite. Oh, this great NATO satellite that cost $1 billion and all that. But we have to be at war in the Pacific, so we're not sure what that means. Maybe it just means of you guys, you NATO guys, you stay out of our conflict. Or it's a, you know, an intent kind of thing, you know. And so, okay, we lost our weather capabilities. We can't tell what the weather in the battlefield is going to be like. Okay, so how serious is that? Is that worth going to blow up an adversary destroyer or taking out their command center? Yeah, it's kind of nice knowing weather, but we happen to be fighting in the desert in the Middle East now, so weather doesn't impact us that much. You know, it's all these kind of things that, how do you calculate, you know, the value of the information being generated from space? And then we've got that all figured out. And you say, well, okay, now what do I do about it? Do I start scattering my other critical assets so they can't track them? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Do I change the rules of engagement? Maybe I have some shoot back capability on side one of my satellites. I mean, the Russians had a anti-aircraft cannon on their Almaz. You know, do I say, you know, and during peacetime, you're not going to make that anti-aircraft cannon automatically shoot at anything that comes at you. But if you're in general war on the ground, you might just flip the switch and say, yeah, shoot at anything that comes within 100 meters of you or something like that, you know. And even if it's accidental and we shot an ally, it's sort of like, oh, sorry, you know, it's not that big a deal because we're really serious in war. And then if you're like at nuclear war, it's like, I'm going to kill everything in space. I don't care. And, you know, if you, you know, commercial satellite are going to complain about it afterwards, I just killed 1 million people. Are you really not afraid of me? You know, there's different levels that you could be at, I guess, in what your response would be. And then getting back to before you got to those responses, you have what's called the National Command Authorities in the United States. That's the President, Secretary of Defense, probably Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And then there's this whole thing called commander's intent. It's like, well, yeah, we've got all these great weapon systems and they're in place and the people are trained on them and they're just itching to push that red button to have them start attacking. But the commander comes out and says, well, my intent for today is we're going to hold back and understand better what's happening and we'll absorb any attacks. Or I'm not really sure who's doing this, I only authorize reversible kinds of attacks, where you will deny an adversary the capability to use his communication satellite for the next 48 hours only. In other words, jam it or cyber attack, and then let go afterwards. So there's, the commander is really the guy in charge trying to tell you what to do. And of course, there's certain rules of engagement. Oh, don't blow up churches or, mosques and things like that. And, a rule of engagement in space might be, these are missile warning satellites up there. They're infrared satellites that show missile launches. Right now, we just have a conventional war on the ground and a conventional war in space, but you better not go against those missile warning satellites, because those are called national technical means. And if we wanted to escalate to nuclear war, those are the first things we'd go against, to take out his eyes in space. So you can't tell our ICBMs coming out and things like that. So we don't want to give any sort of indication that we're thinking about going to nuclear war by attacking those satellites. You idiots, don't even touch them, kind of thing, because you're going to cause a nuclear war, the escalation. And that's what I'm talking about, space conflict level and how it's linked to the ground. And a few weeks ago, I talked about the conflict in space over the Ukrainian issue in 2014, and how actions in space got linked to actions on the ground. And so it's important to use the word perceived conflict level on the ground and a perceived conflict level in space, I guess. I mean, I'm making this up, but there, really better be. And those could be linked. So maybe you don't really want to increase the conflict level in space. It's like, oh, we're all just doing cyber attacks and jamming right now. We haven't created any debris. We haven't done any destruction. That's the level we're kind of at, at the moment. So we don't want to do something that might increase that conflict level. It might inspire the other side to do something bad, not only in space or on the ground. Oh, we took out his billion-dollar satellite, so he's going to blow up one of our ships, and we're going to lose hundreds of sailors or something. That's not worth it. Of course, perceived is a very fuzzy word, and all wars like that. We don't really understand what the other guy wants, and we think we know what he wants, but he's entirely different language and culture and all. And maybe he's going to war because he's trying to rally his people in the country. He's just going to war for the fun of it, to make, say, oh, we're the ones who started it, and keep his political position. And let's face it, ultimately, that is in the back of the minds of all commanders. Not to get shot or not to lose your political power. And if you feel you're going to lose your political power by going through this conflict, you might not start it, or you might end it sooner because of that. Okay, and now we're to the tactical level. Now, the earlier level, we had space courses of action. Oh, I forgot to mention, they have to be conflicted with terrestrial courses of action. There's all kinds of ways that they're fighting on the ground. And let's say you have signals intelligence that's monitoring this adversary satellite, and the adversary commander is talking on the satellite, and you're listening to his plans. And it's like, oh, this is great. And suddenly, boom, what happened? Oh, Space Force just knocked out that satellite. Well, you idiots, that was really important. You should have cleared that with us first. And I heard that, a little bit, the F-15 air-launched ASAT, which I was on the program supporting the guy in charge of it at the Pentagon. And they took out a science satellite that supposedly was dead. And then years later, the guy in charge of the science satellite told me, well, it wasn't dead. We were still using it. And they never told us they were going to attack it. You know how that works. You never know what's happening. And then you've got the laws of armed conflict, which is, I guess it's an international thing and a national thing. And it's sort of like, well, you don't want to be killing civilians and stuff like that. I don't know if there's any applicability to taking out civilian satellites. Of course, you've got a commercial imagery satellites that are pretty high resolution and, you know, pretty effective on the battlefield. I think I told you guys last time, years ago in the 90s, we were really upset about the French spot satellite. And we were thinking all kinds of ways to mess with that. Sorry to say. Okay, so we were deconflicting with the strategic level, but we also have to deconflict with other space courses of action. Maybe we have a special forces team going in on the ground to take out this terminal. We don't need to take out the satellite, you know, or we have some allies that are, you know, have another way to maybe deny that satellite system, or maybe they've got people on the ground that are using the communications in that satellite or something. You know, you have to really have a guy in charge of all these space courses of action who's also aware of the terrestrial ones, you know, deconflicting them, make sure they're not tripping over each other. And then, of course, there's rules of engagement that are different than space, than the terrestrial. And I've got some ideas of what those could be. And then you don't just attack satellites. Part of this planning process, the SOAD, Space Operational Art and Design, you have to say, well, okay, we're going to take out this communication satellite. Great. How do we measure success criteria? Well, we're going to jam this satellite. Success criteria is we've got this antenna on the ground. We no longer hear the signal coming back. No, okay, maybe that works. And the success indicator is you have no signal coming in the back. Now, if you've got a cyber attack, then it might be harder to say, well, maybe he's playing dead and he really isn't. But you've got to list these. And then you've got to queue up the sensors to look for it, for bomb damage assessment, BDA. And so you also have to queue up the space surveillance sensors to see, well, did the thing kind of start spinning? You know, it's going crazy now. It's maneuvering crazily. Maybe it did a cyber attack where you made it turn on its thrusters randomly. Who knows? But you got to like check. Yeah, we did it. And then there's what's called weaponeering. And this is on the ground. It's like the commander says, okay, I want you to take out this airplane hangar on this part of the base. And there's called basic encyclopedia number. There's a B number for the whole base. There's a sub number, and I forget the names of them now. I used to know all this. It'd be a different sub number for the individual hangar on that base, and then a sub number for the individual corner of the hangar that you want to put the smart munition on. So why not in space, you know? And I think they've changed this, but years ago there weren't even B numbers for satellites. You know, I made some fake ones when I was doing this planning. I've been to about 15 different space exercises. I think they probably have B numbers now. But do they have sub numbers of the different subcomponents? And so the whole weaponeering is on the ground. It's like, okay, we've got to queue up these 3 different A-10 Warthogs attack aircraft. We're going to use this airfield and that airfield. We recommend these kinds of bombs with this kind of delay on the bomb, so it penetrates the concrete top of the hangar and gets through and blows up the aircraft. We're going to queue this UAV drone that's going to look at it later. Maybe it looked at it before to see if an airplane is in the hangar or anything. You know, so you have to figure that all out. And of course, you got to figure that all out for space. Not enough they've really thought it through. Because when I was working with these guys, they just were thinking of onesies and twosies and, oh, gee, look at this great technology versus how to really implement it. But I bet you they're getting smarter in that and figuring it out. And as I grown older, I understand the bigger picture. It's not only the weaponeering, but it's like the results afterwards. you'd have to, do the bomb damage assessment. Maybe you got to put another weapon on it in space. Maybe you want dual phenomenologies of, well, let's jam the satellite so it can't communicate to its ground terminal. So the ground commander can't tell the satellite to, put up shields, put up a, what do you call it, a shutter on the optics, start spinning if it thinks it's going to be a laser hitting it. So you distribute the laser energy. You sort of fix it in space with this jamming while you bring up in a few hours a something that's going to do the job really good, something that kills it or puts this bag around it, whatever. So you've got the dual phenomenologies to increase the probability of kill, but you got to go beyond that. You got to think in terms of, well, have I created any space debris? Is that space debris near the International Space Station? Is there some way they're talking about cleaning up space debris? Do we have a sweeper nearby? What are the political implications? Which people never think about. They just, yes, sir, I'm going to do this. But, maybe we really shouldn't go against that satellite. Try this other one. It'll be more palatable to the political types, the diplomats and things like that. Anyway, so that you've got this course of action, you finally execute it. And then you go through this loop saying, well, were we successful? We got to do weaponeering again, execute again. Oh, terminate space operations. We've we've preserved the advantages we had from there. We don't want to backfill, but go back. So that's, as usual, I took way too long on that. Now, going a little bit deeper in that, we've got, I think the true genius with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Pub 3-0, and you guys can download it. All that stuff is online because Doctrine, you got to teach all the forces, so it can't be classified. And so the one genius thing I thought is the Joint Pub says, before you do any sort of military planning, before you move forces in, before you shoot one bullet, you have to write down, well, what are the surrender criteria? Under what criteria would we terminate military operations? And, for terrestrial things, it's kind of easier, like, oh yeah, capture Saddam Hussein, take Baghdad, destroy his war material, put out the fires, the oil wells. You could list all these military, diplomatic, political kind of criteria. So you start from that, and then you back off from that. Well, in order to capture Baghdad, we need to move 300 miles after landing in Kuwait. So we need these kind of tanks that can go that far, but we need extra fuel put here. And we need at least 5 divisions because the forces of this, you figure it out from there based on, well, we're trying to capture Baghdad, that's the ultimate goal or whatever. So there's some sort of national strategic end state to the conflict. And that's kind of political too, that, come down from authorities on high. And then there's strategic and operational objectives kind of based on what I just showed you in the previous charts. And they're not, these are space ones, but they're there supporting terrestrial, okay, we're gonna do the left hook on the ground and swing around the Iraqi forces. Space, you guys deny the Iraqis' ability to image the battlefield over the next 24 hours over these lat-long positions. That's what comes down. They don't say, take out this satellite. It's like, well, you got to figure it out. And you have to look up the rules of engagement, say, oh, it doesn't allow me to take out, generate space debris. I better do a cyber attack. Oh, let me look this up. They have what's called target folders, which used to be actual physical folders. I've seen them. I'm sure they're all electronic now. That says, well, this imagery satellite, they've got 3 of them. They're of this resolution. Here's the orbits. They come over every 6 hours, and it downlinks to this command center, and it takes them 4 hours to process the information, and then it goes through these communication terminals to get to the battlefield. So you figure that all out, and then you say, well, I could blow up the satellite. I could jam the downlink coming down. I can take out the ground terminal, maybe physically with soft special forces, or maybe they come in and they just blow up the power supply. So, they can't move the antenna. Maybe there's some cyber attack that makes the antenna spin wildly until it spins off its axis. I mean, it's all these like clever things you could do. Maybe I just shoot the commander and make it easy. You don't care what information he gets. Or wait a minute now, I've got this special laser that will throw a different image up to this satellite. It's a real secret. I won't tell you anything about it, but they'll show a false picture on the satellite. So that's good enough. We don't have to kill anything, So you've got all of these different ways of doing it. And, ultimately, oh yeah, you're supporting that ground. You're not blowing things up in space because it feels good, because I'm a Star Wars guy or something like that. You've got to time it to what's happening on the ground. You've got to say, he told you, don't allow imagery of the location of our tanks. So you got to look at, well, this is a 20 meter resolution imagery satellite. That's fine. They won't be able to see tanks, and figure that all out. You got to figure out the rules of engagement. You got to figure out confidence. Like, yeah, I'm going to send up this cyber attack to the satellite, start make its shutter close when it comes over. We haven't been able to test it exactly before. We went to one of those shows in Europe, one of those space shows, and we took pictures of the satellite. And there was I know people, we used to go do that, this one manufacturer who builds shutters, was there, and we exchanged cards. And what we did was we went, 6 months later and bought one of those shutter devices, and we put it in our secret Air Force lab, and we tested it, and it seemed to work pretty good for us to make it go crazy. We have 80% confidence that this will work, kind of thing. And so that's kind of how it works, prep of the battlefield. The commanders, is 80% good enough for you? Because, if they do image the battlefield, they'll see our left hook and we'll lose. Okay, go ahead and play with your spinning shutter. But I also want a high-powered laser to destroy that CCD chip behind it. And if that doesn't really work, I want to send up another satellite, an ASAT, that's going to kind of stand by a few kilometers apart. And I know this is a commercial satellite and I'm not supposed to really mess with it, but if those other techniques don't work, I'm going to go in and blow the hell out of it, because it's so important. So that's the desired and undesired effects. And to what degree do you really, want to plan all this and get it right? And then you have what's called space tactical tasks. And again, you have success criteria and success indicators. You don't just do it, you've got to know that you've done it and have confidence. Okay, so these are the various things that came from the Joint Chiefs for fighting wars on the ground. And Will, let's see, I had 2 hours, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, if I'm not tiring you guys out, because I said this would be in the detail, you asked for it.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I have a question for you, Paul.
Sure.
About your last slide, about the undesired effect. I suppose in this kind of operations, in this kind of space operation, when you say space desired and undesired effect, is there a kind of a way to to estimate the level of undesired, of undesired effect. I mean by this a kind of coefficient of operation is there a kind of canvas, a kind of a board to with a lot of indication, a lot of variable that say, okay, we will have in this operation we'll have this kind of risk of undesired effect. Is there a kind of system like that?
Well, certainly we're talking war, and all sorts of crap's going to happen. And you're going to sit there and think it's going to happen this way, and it's not. That's why you have a plan A, B, and maybe C. But hopefully you had your egghead scientists model a lot of this. Said, oh, we have this new ASAT system that is a net that we throw over the satellite, of kind of thing. And we've modeled it, in our supercomputers, and we find out it works pretty good. We don't think any part will break off, during this. Now, how things work out. I guess there's always a small probability that there'll be undesired effects, that when the satellite starts spinning its solar panels, because it's trying to figure out what happened, it can't image itself, doesn't know what's happening. It might start breaking apart, and suddenly pieces go towards the International Space Station, undesired effects.
Yes, sure.
Some of these satellites are international satellites like Intelsat that multiple parties, multiple countries use different channels for communication. And so the desired effect would be deny this one channel that the adversary is using to communicate to its forces. And the rules of engagement are, but don't, bleed off. Don't have a jammer signal so strong that it bleeds off into the other channels and denies diplomatic communication, which we really want to, be able to stop this war. We need that. And oh, by the way, we don't want to upset France, by messing with their ability to communicate with the embassies and stuff like that. Well, sure enough, that kind of happens. Oh, sorry, undesired effects. We tried hard. The scientists, damn it, told us it wouldn't happen, but it happened anyway. And I've seen this. I've seen all sorts of crazy things. So yeah, you try to simulate it. You actually grab physical equipment that an adversary has on his satellite, and you put it, maybe in this underground command center that has lasers going hundreds of feet, and you test it. What's the effect of lasers on this guy? And you think what it's going to happen. Of course, maybe the adversary put some other different piece of equipment on there than you thought. When you went to those space shows and he had the satellite there and you took a picture of it and it says, oh, it looks like he's putting this on there, and maybe he was just trying to fool you. Maybe you're not exactly sure the effects of the lasers, even though you spent years testing them in the lab. Maybe there's some sort of new paint they used on there that ablates off and goes into the the optics train. You know how things go, or even yourself in your home, you think you know what you're doing and it doesn't work. So yeah, you try hard. You have labs that look at this stuff. At least they used to look at this stuff. The lab I used to work at, I think they established it. One would hope. But in my experience too, there's a lot of, maybe not a lot, but some crazy generals who will do a lot of different things. And there's a lot of crazy things that happen. And you can do a lot of crazy things in space and get away with it because no one knows you did it. And it's plausible deniability. It's like, oh, gee, your satellite stopped working. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. For a big thank about your answer. And I will keep another question for the end of the conference, but to talk about the crazy things that general can make in the space, like it's a new territory of war. So I will keep my question for the for end of the conference, but thank you for that.
Okay, so these are the fundamental elements that the Joint Chiefs put down on how to fight wars on the ground. And I kind of change these over to how to fight wars in space. So you need to know centers of gravity. And that is, you know, and I actually have a briefing on just about every one of these bullets, a separate briefing. Those are the areas that if you apply force or do something to mess with it, would have the maximum effect on the conduct of the war for the adversary side, let's say, you know. Center of gravity, oh, blow up this ammo dump, you know, or blow up this bridge. Center of gravity for space, maybe a launch facility. There's not too many of those. Those are very expensive. If he thinks he's going to be replenishment launching. And then there's a whole bunch of other things, like things called decisive points, lines of operations. It gets very complicated, but it's a good system that one should really establish for space. I mean, I think France should establish this kind of thought piece. I don't know how they do things now. There's lines of effort. There's called direct and indirect approach. You know, going, I mentioned the direct approach, blow up this satellite terminal. The indirect approach, blow up the power station that's providing power to that terminal, you know, 2 miles down the road. Mentioned expect the unexpected. And then operational reach. It's like, well, yeah, we're at war in the Middle East, but damn, we don't have our airfields in Afghanistan anymore. We're gonna have to pull in an aircraft carrier to get close. Oh, that takes a month or two to ship out there, you know. Okay, what's the operational reach in space? Well, take radars, ground radars. The standard radar only, I think, is like 2,000 miles reach. Well, that's nothing in space. That's why a lot of it is optical. What if you got some highfalutin space laser? Well, on the ground, that can't reach geosynchronous satellites. I mean, you're just not going to get the power on target. Maybe you have a jammer. Well, that can't go too far. Let's say you have it in space. What's the operational reach of the amount of fuel? And it's not only that, it's duration. Oh, yeah, I can get there, but it'll take me 2 weeks. You know, it's like, well, thanks for nothing. War's over with by then. And then there's a concept called culmination, where he's, you know, his forces are at 100 and we're at 100, however you define that figure 100, you know, he has 100 tanks, I have 100 tanks or whatever. And we've messed with him and attacked back and forth. And now he only has 50 tanks and we have 100. And we say, oh, we reached culmination. We reached our goal, I guess. So in space, culmination might be, well, after weeks of operations of jamming and cyber attacks and laser this and taking my mechanical arms and tearing apart a satellite, we've degraded half of his military capability to support this particular battlefield. We've reached culmination. You know, we've gotten to that point where it's all downhill now for him. You know, we're doing really well. And so first of all, you have to have simultaneous operations, space and ground. Oh yeah, deny the ability of the adversary to image the battlefield. Well, that's not for the next 100 years, it's for the next 24 hours or something like that. Maybe you have to have simultaneous attacks against multiple imagery satellites, which is actually hard to do because of orbital dynamics, but you want the maximum shock effect. And are you willing to do that and use up all your, let's say you have 10 ASATs and you have 5 satellites to attack, you could say, I want high confidence that we took out his imagery. I'm going to put 2 ASATs against each satellite. You know, maybe one goes in first, and then the other one has some imagery and images and say, oh, that first one didn't do a good enough job. I'm going in again now myself. You could do it that way. You could have 5 satellites go against 5 ASATs go against 5 satellites, and leave 5 extra for, well, we might need these later. You know, so in other words, are you going to do simultaneous attacks to really get the job done quickly and decisively? Or are you going to like, well, I don't want to use up all my ASATs. I might need them for something else, guys. Let's go in and see, use up 5 of them. And we notice, so 3 of them did a good job, but these other 2 didn't. So, okay, I'm going to send in 2 more. All 5 are gone now, and I've got 3 left. I'm ahead of the game, but that took twice as long to get done, you know? So it's this concept of timing and tempo. Is it boom, 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 or just boom, boom, boom? You know, what is the tempo and what is the timing and the sequences? And I bet you they haven't got this right at all. I bet you Space Force isn't talking to the ground people of, you know, the timing of when these satellites are going to get deployed and the ASATs employed. I know they all sit in the same command center. I don't think that's good enough, but you know, whatever. I haven't been to there for a while, so it might have changed. And then, are you going against forces or the functions? And so, really, the supreme commander is going to say, don't let them image that battlefield over these lat-long coordinates over the next 24 hours. Yes, sir. Okay, well, what does that really mean? Oh, I better take out this imagery satellites, but I better coordinate with taking out the UAVs and the drones that are going to image the battlefield too. Maybe even that guy with binoculars on the camel. You know, are you concentrating on forces, taking out the satellites, or concentrating on the function? And it's really the function that matters. And I don't think the Space Force people really understand that yet, that it's what they do supporting the terrestrial battlefield that counts, not necessarily the fact that it's the satellite and I killed the satellite. And then there's this other concept of flexible deterrent options. And I have a whole briefing on that. What would they be for space? And that is, well, you know, we don't really do World War II, boom, 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 kill everybody, blow up everything kind of thing. There's more subtlety nowadays. And there's kind of a continuum of conflict and peace. And even though you're at peace, maybe you're kind of messing with them a little bit. And so you need options. You know, if the colonel comes into the general and say, yes, sir, I've got this great laser that can blow up this adversary satellite, the general's going to say, well, yeah, I'm not sure I really want to do that. Do you have a nice jammer, you know, that we could do it? And he says, well, it's not in the, you know, it's not in the right position at the moment. I can get in there in 48 hours, you know, ship it in by the Air Force plane. He says, well, yeah, but we're shipping in all these, we're flying in all these troops, so we don't have any planes available for that. Come up with another option. Come up with flexibility. Oh, okay. I've got this laser, and it's just kind of a blinding laser, and it's not powerful enough to, you know, melt anything, but it's enough to, you know, blind him temporarily and make his shutter close. And it takes him hours to figure out how to, you know, get it open again and figure out, reconfigure the satellite. And the general says, okay, that's good enough. You know, now usually for terrestrial, they have flexible deterrent options might be, well, instead of blowing up this thing in the battlefield, let's do economic sanctions, or let's go to the UN and make some sort of treaty or something like that. You know, there's different ways of doing things. Maybe if he doesn't stop doing this, we're gonna do a cyber attack on the adversary general's bank accounts. I don't know. Okay, baseline considerations. So all of this is stuff I put together, but I don't know if you guys have heard of the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And if you've got this briefing, you can click on these things and it'll tell you, take you there for more information. And these are the levels of command. And then it might be outdated by now. I made this briefing 15 years ago. The different ways that you're going to get that information. And then here's rules of engagement. Of course, you got a level of war, you have peace, you have kind of a crisis, and I call it a space crisis, which might be different than a terrestrial crisis. You have the conventional kinds of terrestrial battle, but it's just ground. And then you have conventional, terrestrial, and space together. So these are different ways of attacking. And again, if you click on here, it'll give you the official definitions, but this is less severe to more severe. So deception is, what I mentioned earlier, is there some way to insert a false picture in this imagery? Disruption, if I recall, it's temporarily denying his ability to use that satellite, but only partially denying it. So let's say if it's a communication satellite, you're temporarily jamming one channel, but not the other channels. Denial is temporarily denying all channels and all functionality of the satellite. Maybe you made it start spinning, and so it's not useful to anyone until they spend a few days trying to figure it out. Degradation is a permanent damage, but partial. So maybe you somehow had a high-powered microwave weapon and you took out some of his channels, but not all of them. Or maybe even better yet, you degraded his solar power. Somehow the panels, a laser melted part of it, or you chopped off one panel or something like that, or painted it. And now he has half the power. Well, it's degraded, it's permanent. He still can use some of the communications, but not all of them. And then destruction is blow the hell out of them. We don't care. So what I'm saying here is what are you allowed to do based on the level of war that you happen to be at? And that could be a perception that you're perceived, we're still just in crisis mode, where the other guy says, yeah, I'm going for it. I'm not the whole thing, But yeah, during peacetime, you can deceive them. It happens all the time. Temporary disruption, maybe, it kind of happens sometimes. I mean, we had in the 1960s, the Russian trawlers jamming some of our satellites. We weren't particularly at war or anything. No, you can't really take out the whole thing. You can just kind of mess with them, I don't think, or the trouble is if you do, you're suddenly going to space crisis. Now, if you're already at crisis and things are happening and he was messing with you and you're messing back, then maybe you can mess 100% with him, but no destruction yet or degradation. And then something's happening on the ground, but not in space. So maybe you still don't want to go to permanent partial degradation because you don't want to increase the conflict level for space. And then if all bets are off, if things are shooting on the ground and things are shooting in the space, say, yeah, go for it. So that's, something that you should have. This should be discussed at a space think tank, maybe at IESD. Did I get that right? What are these different levels? And would this be different from the United States versus France or NATO, and different for a NATO conflict, different for Russia versus China versus some Middle East or something? Iran is trying to put up satellites and stuff. That's, what are your concepts? And so this is something that should be debated about, and even, bring in some generals and retired politicians and put something together like this. And it's a start of a discussion, let's say. Now, this is rules of engagement for the theater that you happen to be in. you happen to be in war in the Western Pacific, and so this is, or in crisis or some sort of thing. So these would be the rules. These would be the rules. Am I getting a, I'm getting a reflection here. Can you guys still
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. I heard you too. So
Yeah.
I think
Okay, maybe it went
everything
away.
is okay. Yes, I
Hopefully
heard you.
everyone else has their mic off until they speak. At any rate, I'm thinking there's different rules of engagement according to the theater. You're in the Pacific and things are happening, there's the different rules of engagement, and then if you're in the Atlantic. So I'll get to that in a minute, but this is the weapons release authorization levels. And that is if you have automatic shootback weapons in space. And see, if you have a space weapon, it's worthless if you can't communicate with it. And so what I'm trying to show here is, as the conflict level increases, there's certain control levels. And again, if you click on these, you'll see the definitions. And I took these straight from air defense doctrine, which translates very well to space. And it's, you know, do you have positive control? Meaning somebody's got to really know that something's happening and he's going to push the button, versus a certain degree of autonomous weapons hold. And I forget now. Well, actually, when it comes down to it, I should be able to click on this. I guess I don't have a mouse. At any rate, versus, yeah, kill anything that's within a kilometer of you or something like that. So it's different degrees that you're allowed to let these weapons do their thing. And it's different. This is what I was mentioning. If you are in the current area of responsibility, Western Pacific, the weapons release is looser than if, let's say, you're not in the area of responsibility. But of course, space is global. And so somebody might start messing with you, or ally of somebody in the Western Pacific who happens to be in Africa, or maybe Chinese, they have some space ground control sites in Africa and they start jamming you or something, you know. So things can happen in different theaters, especially with space being all around the world. Okay, now this is another thing, and that is, let's say you're at peace and you had positive control of your space weapons. What's the probability that you would force escalation in space and go to a higher level? And if you positive control, you're not going to shoot. It's controlled by a human, zero chance, maybe it's 0.1% or something, that you're going to start a space war. But as you go to looser and looser control, even in peacetime, you might start a space war simply because the thing started shooting and you didn't really mean it to shoot. And I've got charts that'll show you that satellites come close to each other all the time, just from natural orbital dynamics. I don't even know you can have keep out zones, and I'm not sure I'd even recommend automatic shoot back and things like that. I think you just get in trouble. Okay, we're halfway there. Back up. I'm going to go through these quickly because I want, towards the end, I have a command and control issues that I think are very important. I think I have a whole other briefing on that. But this is taking some of these classical terrestrial definitions, like you guys probably seen the Hollywood movies, DEFCON levels, and how they relate to space. And I have both strategic and tactical defense conditions. And then I've defined space defense identification zones, and long range engagement zones, close attack engagement zones. There, you know, all these kind of things of how close something's towards you and all that. I mean, you got to figure this stuff out. And then I define this whole regions of responsibility. You can't have just one general in charge of the whole world of space. Like everything else, there's generals in charge of, I don't know, Northcom, Southcom, Eurocom, Indo-Patcom, and all, and the same with space, and there's probably different warning levels that you would have. And so this is some of the definitions of that. And then for the geosynchronous belts, what are some of the space defense regions, again, using air defense terminology, that you would have different people in charge of, different systems. You not only have different ASAT systems, but different intelligence gathering systems, because an ASAT system's worthless without the intel gathering information, the radars and optical sensors gathering where is that potential target and what is it doing now? Is it still alive, and things like that. And these are some of the things. There was a Colonel John Warren during Desert Storm who put together this 5-ring center of gravity model. He was part of the infamous checkmate in the Pentagon that did all the targeting in Desert Storm, that went beyond this concept of, oh, we're just blowing up targets because it feels good. It's like functions and why and all that. And so there's kind of a equivalent 5-ring model for targeting space people. I wasn't too happy with this over the years. I don't know why I still have it, but anyway. And then there's various centers of gravity, certain launch corridors. I mean, there's antipodal points where if you launch a missile with a satellite, that from one region on Earth, exactly 180 degrees on the opposite side of the Earth, you will pass through if you hadn't maneuvered. And so, I forget, I think for something like the Russian Plesetsk or something, the antipodal point was in the South Atlantic. And if you had an ASAT system there on a Navy ship, as no one's watching you, you could do some devilish damage. And so there's certain launch corridors that are centers of gravity. Certainly the sun synchronous low Earth orbits, where it's called a train of satellites. They want to be over the same place on Earth about 10:30 in the morning. It has some shadow so you can see contrast and things like that. So a whole bunch of Earth resources and imagery satellites kind of bunch up into those orbits, sort of a Sargasso Sea. As a matter of fact, I always thought it'd be hard to attack a satellite in that orbit, because if you've got an ASAT that's autonomous, it's got to decide which target to go against. And then you might be close to multiple targets and take out the wrong satellite. Now, centers of gravity is more than just a position. It's like geosatellites, when they're starting to change orbital position and they go up to kind of graveyard orbit and start drifting and all, they're kind of vulnerable on that. Another thing is the leader's confidence in their new space technology is the center of gravity. You might assume that some of these authoritarian dictatorship countries that aren't necessarily high tech or run by old fogies who maybe aren't too familiar with technology or space, who don't really believe it, who don't really understand it, since it's mostly information. You could mess with his new space satellite system. You could do cyber attacks over years, saying, oh, stop working today. Oh, an hour later, it's starting to work again. It's kind of fuzzy today. Oh, look at this. It's got lines going through it. And after a while, they just wouldn't trust it. So the center of gravity was in their minds that you're attacking. And then the OODA loops, the decision time cycles, if you can always be quicker than the other guy, you're always going to win. So that's the center of gravity for them. There's mostly ASATs I know of or had optical seekers. So if they're going against a satellite, they time it so that the sun's in the right position, so that the satellite is real bright, and so they got a good signal. And if they're trying to image it, they've got, they can see a lot, because there's very harsh shadows in space, a lack of atmosphere. So there's advantageous solar phase angles for this. Now, there's the opposite of that. If you knew an ASAT was coming at you from a certain region, and if you maneuvered, you can maneuver so that the sun's behind you. And the ASAT probably hadn't thought of that, and maybe would mess up. It's the classic World War I Hun out of the sun attack. That's the center of gravity. I already mentioned the antipodal modes. There's times, it's like once a year at geosynchronous, that they actually go dark, that the sun, the Earth eclipses the sun. And so that's a vulnerable time on there. And then we used to do all sorts of analyses. I've been on about 5 different RPO programs that, well, okay, so you've got this satellite you want to look at, and you got this other satellite that's come in for rendezvous and proximity operations, and it's go look at it. Now it's going to be spinning around. And so how do you want to spin it around? What angles are you going to go at, and so forth, which gives indications of intent. But you want to avoid the satellite's thrusters because he's going to contaminate your optics. So that's a center of gravity. That's something that possibly is defense. If you see someone coming out at you like that up close within 50, 100 meters or something like that, maybe start your thrusters towards him and start, contaminating his sensors. So there's a whole bunch of them here, and it actually goes on and on. Now there's various space objectives, and these are both in space, propaganda, and so forth. You can guys read that on your own. Now, what are their indicators that you're under attack? And I've got some software that I put together that you put in the indicators, and it tells you what kind of attack you're under. Are a bunch of your satellites experiencing anomalies, but over a long time period, not a short time period? Are red satellites changing orientation? Instead of pointing at the Earth, they're pointing at you. Are they starting to maneuver towards you and concentrate against certain critical assets? And then, are things happening on the ground that suddenly these general officer staff cars show up this lowly, space tracking site? What are the different indicators that something's happening, so to speak? And here's even more. And for some reason, I had software that chooses random names around the world. And for some reason, this particular scenario had Chinese sounding names. And here's various reactions. I've got whole spreadsheets on possible reactions, or if the guy does this kind of attack, this is what you should do in response. Continuing on that, whole bunch of possible space strategies. I have a funny story. I always have funny stories. That I was at one exercise, and I said, what we ought to do is take out all the heavy Earth terminals in the country, the big satellite receiver transmitter, but purposely lightly damage one of the terminals and go in with anti-personnel weapons 6 to 12 hours later to take out the maintenance personnel. And I had a colonel at the exercise horrified that I was, recommending we attack space personnel, even though thousands of people were dying on the ground with this theoretical exercise. And I was just sort of astounded at that attitude, that it was kind of a NASA mentality for most of my career when it came to space, military space, and the Air Force. They claim they're trying to change that. And, Space Force is the Air Force. They all transferred over. I don't know, what the attitude is, but that culture is very hard to change. And so this is what I called herd space personnel, one of those strategies. And then I have a whole other briefing on Sun Tzu's Art of War. And I've been translating those to space strategies. I think it's up to 600 different strategies I've derived, even though I'm not even halfway through Sun Tzu's teachings. Okay. You know, what I'm going to say is we're going to save this part of the briefing for another time, because this is another 30 pages and they're very important. So maybe the next schedule I'll go over. And let me just show you, you know, look at course of action restrictions, force readiness, political restrictions, military, you know, you define winning the space war, probability of collateral damage. And then I have a whole thing of commanders, decision-making, and what is the kinds of things he needs to decide and all. But anyway, yeah, it's probably time to open up for questions.
Okay, Paul, very big thing about this presentation, and you are right, everything is very interesting. So I think it will be better to keep the second part in for another conference that we can do. But we can do later, because like everything is interesting, we risk to be out of time. So it's extremely interesting, and to see all of the process that we can see in the space operation centers, and the way to think of space operation commander. About the questions, so like every time, so I will ask about the first, Jean-François Jeunesse, the ex-Scientist Vice President of Airbus. So Jean-François, if you are here, if you have questions.
Yes, can you hear me first of all?
I can.
Sure.
Can you? Okay, good, because I'm in on two sets at the same time, so this is why I had this question. Thank you very much for your presentation, very interesting. And I have, you know, I would say side question compared to what you presented. And I apologize in advance if it's not in the thread, in the main thread of what you said, but not that far, by the way. So it's about space situational awareness. And I have 4 questions which go all together. The first one is, how do you define the threshold for qualifying an attack? Because, you know, an attack may be direct and very violent, or it can be, I would say, sneak maybe. Yeah. And so there must be kind of the threshold. This is. I'm going to ask the 4 questions, and then you can answer.
Well, I'm an old man. By the time we get to the 4th question, I'll forget the first one. So let me do the first one first. You're right. I mean, that's hard. And it's probably the, you know, how to detect an attack. And that's I had those 6 levels of, you know, will we be under attack? So future kind of thing is probably the most important. And I have software that looks at strange things happening in space, and it looks at 26 different parameters, you know, the radar cross-section, optical cross-section, size, mass, orbital elements, and all that, and looks at strange things happening. And I mentioned that earlier. So that would give a strategic indicator that something's up, maybe even a tactical indicator of, well, this satellite's been floating around here for years in this orbit, and now it's suddenly changed orbit, or something came out of it, a daughter satellite, and it's going towards one of our other ones, you know. Okay, so you sit there and say, well, I don't like that. It's suspicious. Oh, by the way, weren't the Russians just doing that? Did they do it to French satellites? I know they were doing it to American ones, coming up close, you know. Is that enough to start a war? No. If suddenly your satellite stopped working, is that circumstantial? You know, they break sometimes. Did the Russian thing, inspector satellite, actually do something? Were they testing, let's say, a little probe, a cyber laser RF, and they didn't think something would happen, but accidentally it did? Or did they accidentally bump into it and they didn't really mean to? Or look at all these forces on the ground building up in the Ukraine. That looks really serious. And then this looks serious. And this is one of 10 things happening in space. So it's kind of the situation, you know, and you don't want to start a space war if they did it kind of accidentally, or it almost seems like an acceptable level of, it's almost like during the Cold War, where a Russian destroyer would cut off one of the American destroyers and sometimes accidentally bump it or smash into it. You know, was that an act of war? You know, maybe 100 years ago would have been, but I think the same things are happening in space. So I think it's going to be very hard to determine what's really happening and why. So it's called PBA, Predictive Battle Space Awareness, where generally in space it takes hours and days to maneuver, you know, and so maybe you got some indications there. You've got signals intelligence that, well, look at these strange signals they're sending up to this satellite that's coming towards me. You've got, you know, there's some satellites have command interference detection, laser detectors. They have some of their own sensors on board. But to be able to figure, so you can maybe predict, maybe not, because let's say this satellite was part of that debris cloud I mentioned earlier, and it started maneuvering out over the Antarctic, where no one has any sensors, I don't think. And it started suddenly coming out of the blue, let's say, and you see this item, and it's called a UCT, uncorrelated target. It hasn't gone through any radars. It's in a new orbit, so you can't track what it was. I mean, there's not fingerprints on the satellite. And so what are you going to do about it? You're going to start maneuvering out of the way? Well, that's the best way to take out your satellite, is make it keep maneuvering until it has no fuel left, you know, so you've done the job. You know, there's a lot of countries, well, the Arabs used to do that to the Israelis, is, you know, make a run for the border and get all their troops right at the border and then stand down, just to try to make the Israelis ruin their economy by going to a wartime setting, you know. So I'm sure there's a lot of funny things happening. And war, I think, at least in the United States, is going to self-deter, that they don't really want to start a space war. They're going to try to do the rules of engagement and the laws of armed conflict and outer space treaty and this and that. And at least years ago, I was told that at the NCA level, National Command Authorities, they would not authorize a space attack until they really knew who did it. And, oh yeah, we're at war with China now in the Western Pacific, and this geosynchronous communication satellite covering the naval carriers coming in was out, suddenly stopped working, you know. So what are they going to do? Start attacking Chinese satellites? Or are they going to call up the civilian controller who controls it and says, you know, oh, what happened, you know? Matter of fact, I remember a story. They had the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. That's the deep underground bunkers in Colorado Springs. I've been in it a few times. And I went in once and was talking to the commanders there. And this is the, you know, nuclear control bunker. It tells us whether we're under nuclear attack or not. And this is decades ago, I was in there. And I said, oh, okay, well, what do you guys do when your communication is cut off? And I had this fantasy in my head that, oh, all these flashing lights goes on and klaxon bells, you know. And the commander says, oh, we just call Ma Bell and see what the issue is, you know. So I probably lost it now, but what, you know, how do you really know what's happening? So I think we're going to self-deter. We're not really sure. We're going to try to figure it out. Then make some calls, do some imagery, this and that. And if the adversary has been able to pre-position their ASATs at critical jumping off points, that would optimize an attack. And there's two kinds of attacks. You cannot start maneuvering anywhere in the orbit. I have a wargaming software I had someone put together for me. There's only specific times that you can start maneuvering to be able to match the orbit of another satellite. And so there's critical choke points that you probably should pre-position your satellite, your ASATs at. So you can either start maneuvering them all at once from these critical choke points, but they will hit their targets at different times, or you can start maneuvering them from these critical choke points at different times, so they all hit their targets at the same time for maximum shock value. So, you know, if you had not only good sensors to see these satellites, but intelligent algorithms and intelligent people who tell you, oh, these are where these choke points are. And they're not fixed in space, but they're fixed orbits. And they're different for, well, are we at war in the Pacific or the Atlantic? And probably different according to the kind of attack they're trying to generate, you know, going against comm or navigation or something like that. And so you could maybe derive strategic warning if you had the good sensors, the good algorithms that tell you, oh, look at these 10 different ASATs are, you know, marshaling at these choke points. And those choke points seem to statistically correspond to attacks on our command and control network in space. And so you've made those conclusions, but then it's like, well, why? You know, are we at war in the ground? Are they setting up? They're going to take out our eyes and ears in space before they attack on the ground, which is a smart thing to do. Does it indicate something really happening on the ground more than space? You have to think more in just onesies and twosies. Oh, I have my one satellite and this guy is coming after me. That's not sufficient for you to make conclusions with, I think. So I think we'll self-deter, we'll wait, and the war will be over with before we do something about it. So this concept of good sensors, you know, SSA to SDA, good algorithms, good lower level people to interpret it, and decisive commanders who trust those sensors, have experience with them, trust those people. And it's almost good political types, because I don't know if the general will be authorized to start a space war on his own, you know, unless something's happening on the ground already. So all of those sound low probability that you'll get all of those right at once. So it might very well be who's ever the meanest and the quickest and doesn't care about rules of the road and international treaties and the UN will win the space war. Whoever attacks first wins. Question number 2. Oh, I don't know if you guys, I'm sorry. I'm showing you my spreadsheet of the SOAD. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just flip some of these while I'm going through. Sorry, question number 2.
Okay, question number 2 is in the same way a bit is, you know, you told us that space war takes place within 24 hours to 48.
Yeah, if it's a major war versus someone just piddling a little bit here, a little bit there, attacking here, seeing what's happened there. But if you want, I'm going to attack on the ground. I want to take out 50 US satellites that can support that ground war. And I want to do it as quickly as possible. That's 24 to 48 hours.
So the question is, how much time do you impart for taking a decision for triggering a space war? Because, you know, once you are inside the war, it's very quick. And it means that you are able to evaluate all the enemy's possibilities and capabilities. And you told us during this conference that it's very easy to hide and to have maybe secret resources, something like this. So it's very dangerous because it's very difficult to evaluate the true power of the adversary. So what about this?
You're fucked. I don't know what you could do, really, that you've got all these factors, plus the fact that you don't have experience.
Hello?
You can hear me, right?
Yes, now, yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. There was a cut.
I think that's an extremely difficult thing, and it's the most important, really. It's just, you could hide so much, you could take out so quickly, especially if you're talking about things you don't care about generating debris. If you want something more subtle, then you have to come up, you know, with some sort of maintenance satellite and spray paint your solar panels, or, you know, things like that. That's kind of pussyfooting around. I think the one thing you can do is, if you've determined that they're setting up for a space attack in the next few days or next week, and they're starting to concentrate on these choke points, maybe you can frustrate it at that point by attacking those ASATs at the choke points, denying command and control of those ASATs, because if you more or less know, okay, they're going for it and there it is, maybe we can deny their ability to communicate to the ground. Maybe you can go to the UN and say, well, it looks like they're building up to attack in space, which means their attack on the ground, you know, go stop it. Because if he can't surprise you, maybe he wouldn't do anything about it. Now, you could have scatter on warning. If you've got these critical satellites, you can start maneuvering them, especially again with this low thrust electric thrusters, so that, you know, every ASAT has to have its own onboard sensors for the end game. You know, the orbital elements are never going to be accurate enough. It's got to be able to come in and have a radar or optical or something like that. Hopefully it has to identify the target, that it's got the right target. It's got to know, is the target pointing at me? Did it start changing attitude? And it's got a big fat laser pointing at me now, I don't know, to blind my sensor or to jam me? Or did it turn its high-powered multi-kilowatt antennas towards me instead of pointing them at the ground to kind of start frying my electronics? And did it start maneuvering away, which is probably hard if you have those huge antennas and huge solar panels, because I think you have to fold them in before you do that. But you might not be able to find it exactly, because he's no longer Keplerian orbital dynamics if he's constantly thrusting. So I guess there's some things that you can do if you had that strategic warning.
Okay, question 3. Question 3 is about subliminal attacks with the aim for you triggering the war. You know that in international law, triggering the war is not the best position. So what about an adversary which would put you in a place to trigger the war and bear the responsibility of triggering the war?
Okay, and yeah, that would be clever. And if we were attacking Iraq in the 1990s, they would never think of that, but the Chinese and Russians would, you know, because they don't care as much about what the world thinks of them as we do. So yeah, I guess there's all sorts of clever things, except if we're pussyfooting around and they just don't think we're going to really attack that easily. You know, that Now, maybe if you think, oh yeah, we've got some real cowboy out there as a president or something, he says, oh yeah, go for it and all. It's, I guess what you could do is for years, you can make fake attacks and go up close to a satellite and not do anything about it. And then measure our response and try to get a sense of what the doctrine is, what the rules are, what the personalities are of the people in charge, what time of day it was, you know, and try to understand command and control. I mean, some Space Force captain at 3 a.m. probably doesn't have the authorization to start a space war, you know. And so maybe it'd take a while. I could see him trying for it. And you'd have to kind of do it, what's it called? Plausible deniability, so that the general populace and the UN could say, oh, the US said they were coming close to us, we had to attack. And they could say, no, we weren't. You know, gee, what are you talking about? Kind of thing. I'm sure there are clever ways you could try for that. And, you know, I had mentioned earlier, war in the Western Pacific, and we, you know, oh, any satellite attack is the Chinese, but maybe it's the Russians trying to stir the pot. They want to make a space war. I'm sure that in military history, you could show examples of that. Okay, next.
And the last one is, what about impersonation? You said it was very difficult to identify who is attacking. So you could have impersonation like in cyber war, and with all the risk it bears on this, not targeting the right adversary.
Well, you're saying the ASAT is impersonating another satellite, or are you going against the wrong target?
For example, you would have an attack from a Chinese, it would come from a Russian or an Indian, something like this. And you would identify the attack coming from a Chinese, for example, and it wouldn't be a Chinese.
Yeah. Well, I'd have to think about that. The US claims they know who owns all satellites. Now, I mentioned earlier, yeah, they don't know 11,000 of them. But assuming you know that was a satellite because you saw it launched from a Russian, you know, a space launch site, and it came out of the missile, and then it went to this orbit, and you know, they more or less track all that. I tell you, they told me once when I was at the Shine Mountain Complex, what was it? They were tracking the Russian space station. It was an Almaz, and they threw out the honeypot, you know, the bathroom stuff. And NORAD tracked that and called it Almaz instead of the real Almaz for a while, until someone noticed the radar cross-section was wrong. So you don't have a guy up there with binoculars seeing things. I suppose you could fly by a satellite and what's it called? Cross correlation or something, and you can confuse them. But if the other satellite is still trying to act like itself, it might be hard to do. I have to think about it. I'm sure human beings are so clever, there's always a way. And I guess the other thing is mimic the actual signals. I mean, there's a lot of signals intelligence that comes off of these satellites, and that's easy to measure, even if it's encrypted. You could just play it back, I guess, with a tape recorder, and it could look like that. Let's say you have a satellite jammer or a cyber weapon on the ground. It doesn't have optics. It just points at a satellite, and you know, the Space Command said, oh yeah, that's where the satellite's supposed to be, and then they're about to jam it. I'm sure they measure the signals that they're about to jam, and they know the power level and the frequency and, you know, the coding and all that. And so if you kind of fake that out, it probably could end up tracking that. You know, give me a few hours, I can come up with all kinds of clever and devious ways of doing things.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your answers.
And thank you very
William?
much, Jean-François. Yes, go on, Jean-François. Yeah. Okay.
It's all right for me. That's 4 questions only, so thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Jean-François, for your questions. I have to take the lead on the conversation because William is out of keyboard for 10 to 15 minutes. Next question, Thomas, do you have any question for Paul?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we copy.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I had my mic muted. I did actually have a question because I'm not well versed in military history in the space domain. At one point, you talked about possible secondary payloads that were piggybacking on official payloads for other reasons. Did that actually happen before? Do we have any proof that a nation launched a small spy satellite piggybacking on another official satellite?
Very
Let
good
me
questions.
be a wise guy. I can neither confirm nor deny that happened.
Oh, all right.
Very clever. Okay.
Right, but it's a plausible scenario, not just
Very
one of them.
plausible. And
All right.
why do you think they're spending hundreds of millions and not billions on inspector satellites? What are they inspecting? They're inspecting war reserve modes. You know, that what are the frequencies of these antennas really? How big are the solar panels? What are these extra boxes on the side that never showed up in official pictures? Is there a door on the side of this thing that opens up and there's a hollow volume inside? Is there a secondary satellite payload? Is there some laser there, you know, HPN? I don't know. But there's certainly many countries are going for it. Maybe even France, you know, they should. Because how else do you really know? And that's part of your long-term intelligence gathering, because it takes months for those things to go around. And like I said, I've been on 5 different programs doing that. I had one program, at any rate. Okay, next question.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Leo, do you have any question for Paul Szymanski?
No question for now about the presentation. I'm sure we can find some proof, but I'm not sure about we can find some on open source easily. I will look for it. No question. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, great. Vivian, have you any question?
No questions for me, but thank you very much, Paul, for your conference. It was very interesting. Maybe later we'll have questions, but not at the moment. But thank you very much anyway.
Okay, great. And I think Will wanted to have a few of these once or twice a month. So you can save the questions for the later.
Okay. Virginie, have you any question?
Oh, no question, but thank you very much, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, so I think we have made all the round table, and if there is no question, I suggest to close the exchange for tonight. Thank you very much, Paul, for being here with us tonight, and I am looking forward your next presentation on Friday about space warfare over the Ukrainian conflict, about how to lose a space war. It will be great for all the ISD personnel and for all our students at Alliance 3 University. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to that in 2 days.
Nice. Okay, so have a great day in Albuquerque, and for the others, for the French guys, have a good night.
Okay. Bye now.